Hey everyone, welcome back to KSSP Podcast, or if you're just joining us, I'm Spencer.
And I'm Katie. Today we're going to talk about mental health and laziness in this episode. So let's get started. For one, laziness doesn't really exist in the way we think it does. Most people aren't actually lazy because they have a desire to contribute to the world. However, there's often underlying factors that prevent them from accomplishing their goals. So I've got a little article here from human parts at medium.com. Laziness does not exist, but unseen barriers do. That's the name of the article. So this is from a psychology professor. It's been practicing since 2012, and they don't believe laziness exists. So let's see. I'm a social psychologist, so I'm interested primarily in the situational and contextual factors that drive human behavior. When you're seeking to predict or explain a person's actions, looking at the social norms and person's context is usually a pretty safe bet. Situational constraints typically predict behavior far better than personality, intelligence, or other individual level traits. So when I see a young student failing to complete assignments, missing deadlines, or not delivering results in other aspects of life, I move to ask, what are the situational factors holding the student back? What needs are currently not being met? And when it comes to behavioral laziness, I'm especially moved to ask, what are the barriers to action that I cannot see? There's always barriers. Recognizing those barriers and viewing them as legitimate is often the first step to breaking lazy pattern behaviors. So it's really helpful to respond to a person's ineffective behavior with curiosity rather than judgment. So when you're homeless, the nights are cold, the world is unfriendly, and everything is painfully uncomfortable. When you're sleeping under a bridge in a tent or at a shelter, it's hard to rest easy. You're likely to have injuries or chronic conditions that bother you persistently and little access to medical care to deal with it. You probably don't have much healthy food. In that chronically uncomfortable, overstimulating context, needing a drink or some cigarettes makes sense. As uh, as her friend Kim explained to her, if you're laying out in the freezing cold, drinking some alcohol may be the only way to warm up and get to sleep. Yeah, I've been there. Not with alcohol, but I've been there. If you're undernourished, a few smokes may be the only thing that kills the hunger pains. And if you're dealing with all this while also fighting addiction, then yes, sometimes you just need to score whatever will make the withdrawal symptoms go away so you can survive. Very true. So few people who haven't been homeless think this way. They want to moralize the decisions of poor people, perhaps to comfort themselves about the injustices of the world. For many, it's easier to think homeless people are in part responsible for their suffering than it is to acknowledge the situational factors. And when you don't fully understand a person's context, what it feels like to be them every day, all the small annoyances and major traumas that define their life, it's easy to impose abstract, rigid expectations on a person's behavior. So let's look at a sign of academic laziness that I believe is anything but procrastination. People love to blame procrastinators for their behavior. Putting off work sure looks lazy to an untrained eye. Even people who are actively doing the procrastinating can mistake their behavior for laziness. You're supposed to be doing something and you're not doing it. That's a moral failure, right? That means you're weak-willed, unmotivated, and lazy, doesn't it? For decades, psychological research has been able to explain procrastination as a functioning problem, not a consequence of laziness. When a person fails to begin a project that they care about, it's typically due to either A, anxiety about their attempts not being good enough, or B, confusion about what the first steps of the task are. Sometimes it's both, too, honestly. I've been there. But it's not laziness. In fact, procrastination is more likely when the task is meaningful and the individual cares about doing it well. So when you're paralyzed with the fear of failure, or you don't even know how to begin massive, complicated undertaking, it's hard to get shit done. It has nothing to do with desire, motivation, or moral upstandingness. Procrastinators can will themselves to work for hours. They can sit in front of a blank Word document doing nothing else and torture themselves. They can pile on the guilt again and again. None of it makes initiating the task any easier. In fact, their desire to get the thing done may worsen their stress and make starting the task harder. So the solution instead is to look for what is holding the procrastinator back. If anxiety is a major barrier, the procrastinator actually needs to walk away from the computer, book, Word document, etc., and engage in a relaxing activity. Being branded lazy by other people is likely to lead to the exact opposite behavior, and that is a problem. So often the barrier is that procrastinators have executive functioning challenges. They struggle to divide a large responsibility into a series of discrete, specific, and ordered tasks. Here's an example of executive functioning in action. I completed my dissertation from proposal data collection to final defense in a little over a year. I was able to write my dissertation pretty quickly and easily because I knew I had to compile research on the topic, outline the paper, schedule regular writing periods, and chip away at the paper, section by section, day by day, according to the schedule I'd predetermined. So, in order to track progress, most people require organizational tools, such as a to-do list, calendar, datebook, or syllabus. Needing or benefiting from such things doesn't make a person lazy. It just means they have needs. So the more we embrace that, the more we can help people thrive. So, okay, I know, of course, that educators are not taught to reflect on what their students' unseen barriers are. Some universities pride themselves on refusing to accommodate disabled or mentally ill students. They mistake cruelty for an intellectual rigor. And since most professors are people who who succeeded academically with ease, they have trouble taking the perspective of someone with executive functioning struggles, sensory overloads, depression, self-harm histories, addictions, or eating disorders. I can see the external factors that lead to these problems, just as I know that lazy behavior is not an active choice. I know that judgmental elitist attitudes are typically born out of situational ignorance. And that's why I'm writing this piece. I'm hoping to awaken my fellow educators of all levels to the fact that if a student is struggling, they probably aren't choosing to. They probably want to do well. They're probably trying. More broadly, I want all people to take a curious and empathetic approach to individuals whom they initially want to judge as lazy or irresponsible. People do not choose to fail or disappoint. No one wants to feel incapable, apathetic, or ineffective. If you look at a person's action or inaction and see only laziness, you are missing key details. There's always an explanation. There's always barriers. Just because you can't see them or don't view them as legitimate doesn't mean they're not there. Look harder. Maybe you weren't always able to look at human behavior this way, but that's okay. And now you can. You can give it a try. So, and that was an opinion piece, of course. But I do agree with pretty much most of what was said. But I do have to say, I I do think there are people who are lazy because they believe others are going to pick up their slack, or they just simply don't care to do more. But the vast majority of us do, in fact, contribute to the world and also manage our personal day-to-day lives adequately, even if we aren't always doing everything we want to accomplish. This can be due to a variety of circumstances, from putting too much on our plates to mental health issues to physical disabilities and more. So we're going to talk a little bit about ADHD and laziness. And people who struggle with laziness often have comorbidities to ADHD as well. Or they might not even have ADHD, but they might have another mental health problem that's in their way. So this is ADHD and laziness. What's really going on, from Psych Central. So if you've been troubling focusing on work or summoning the energy to complete your to-dos, it can feel frustrating. It can be all too easy to put yourself down when you can't meet the goals you've set for yourself. In reality, people with ADHD aren't lazy. This myth tends to come from misunderstandings about how ADHD affects people. The low motivation sometimes experienced by people with ADHD is just one of many symptoms associated with the condition. Although I really don't like calling it low motivation because, like, in my mind, I have the drive to do it, but that doesn't transfer to my body all the time. Like, that's how I kind of see it as someone with ADHD.
Okay.
Because it's not like I don't want to do it. I do want to do it. It's just that the physical motivation isn't there. Like, I'm not able to. Yeah, I'll explain a little bit more after reread this article, but yeah, it's just a little pet peeve I have about ADHD when people say that there's a low motivation. So ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, is a neurodevelopmental condition characterized by a wide range of symptoms and behaviors, some of which can look like a lack of motivation. So symptoms: trouble focusing on tasks or becoming so focused on activity you lose track of time, difficulty paying attention and being easily distracted, moving from one activity or task to another without completing them, impulsive behaviors that may result in negative consequences, regularly forgetting items or appointments, low motivation to begin tasks, especially ones that don't interest you. That's a big part of it, is interest. Our minds, the ADHD mind prioritizes interest over importance. And that's the problem. Like we're more motivated on interest than we are motivated by importance. Like something can be really, really important to us, but it's not going to be prioritized if it's not interesting. So it might not end up getting done, even if it's more important than what we are doing. So that is a way that the brain is more neurodivergent in that sense. So there's deficits in executive dysfunction. So according to researchers in 2020, adults with ADHD showed deficits in executive function and different types of attention. So yeah, executive functioning is the ability to plan, remember instructions, and carry out tasks to completion. So there's differences in brain chemistry. So a study using mice suggests certain neurotransmitters, notably dopamine, may play a role in motivation for people living with ADHD. So lower levels of this neurotransmitter affect reward centers in the brain, causing a lack of enthusiasm for starting or completing tasks. So the research suggests altered patterns in the dopamine pathway may be one reason you might have difficulty with motivation if you have ADHD. So this study found that those with ADHD had difficulty with selective attention and divided attention. So this supports the idea of focusing on an activity or multiple sources of information for a relatively long and undisturbed time can be difficult for adults with ADHD. So it can appear to be a lack of motivation when in reality it's a manifestation of ADHD symptoms. So symptoms differ between adults and children and between men and women, males and females rather. It's sometimes difficult to determine on your own if what you're experiencing is ADHD. So for women, ADHD is often diagnosed because there's just this stereotype of the ADHD little boy who's running around the classroom, Like an ADHD doesn't necessarily, what's it called? It doesn't form itself in that way in women. Like women experience ADHD differently than men, so it's harder for them to get diagnosed because they don't necessarily fit the stereotype all the time. They don't have that like external hyperactivity that you really notice, like running around and shit like that. So yeah, there's tests online you can take if you think you have ADHD. But if you don't have ADHD, what's causing a lack of motivation? Well, it could be complex trauma or CPTSD, and it can cause symptoms and behaviors similar to ADHD, including lack of motivation and impulsivity. So if you experience prolonged and repeat trauma and now feel unfocused or foggy, you're not the only one. You can manage your CPSD. And then there's depression. Tiredness, low motivation, a lack of focus. And then if you have these symptoms for 2 weeks or longer, it could be depression, sadness, hopelessness, and loss of interest in activities you used to enjoy. Then there's anxiety disorders. These symptoms can make it harder to begin or complete tasks, trouble concentrating, restlessness, and difficulty remembering things. And finally, existential crisis. This is questioning your place in life. That can also cause reduced motivation. So if you have trouble finding meaning in your work or feel like you've lost direction in life, this can lead to low enthusiasm. And the feelings are usually temporary. Once you find your focus point again, identify your goals, your motivation will likely increase naturally. So yeah, that was that article. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about executive dysfunction. So, okay, the best way I can describe it is it's a paralyzation of the brain. So kind of like when you see that rainbow swirl on your MacBook, like the loading screen. Like our brains are trying to load, but we can't load to the point of motivation where we begin the task. Like basically being stuck in your head, like being paused. Your head is paused, and we have the motivation to want to do the task, but we don't have the physical motivation to begin or complete the task. Like at least that's just me speaking from personal experience, though. So
Yeah, that makes sense to me too. And the next, the next thing we're just gonna briefly discuss with mental health and laziness is homelessness briefly. So, as it was mentioned, I think a little bit in your one article,
yes,
homeless people obviously aren't lazy. There's just a bunch of different situational barriers and factors that contribute obviously to homelessness, but also that make them appear as lazy because again, people use that term derogatorily rather
yes,
than effectively to like help with change. But so, homeless people who are often thought of as lazy, a lot of times, as we discussed in our homelessness episode, are still working. And there are full time workers who do not have homes, that making them homeless, or by definition, homeless. Although some of them might be like, it depends on
because there's like
some,
homeless
yeah,
people who are couch surfing. Some people live in their cars. Like
yeah,
they're not necessarily on the streets, but they're still homeless.
yes. So, 2021 study from the University of Chicago estimates that 53% of people living in homeless shelters and 40% of unsheltered people were employed, either full or part time, in the year that people were observed homeless between 2011 to 2018. So, as we can see, a majority of people who are perceived of as lazy have other struggles that prevent them from accomplishing their goals. In our next episode, we'll discuss if technology is playing a role at all in making us lazy. So make sure you join us. And you can also leave a comment below letting us know what topics you want us to go over in future episodes.
You can reach out to us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, and we are occasionally on Twitch live streams. So watch out for us there.
Yes, and don't forget to like, follow, or subscribe and turn on notifications so that you get notified of any of our future content or live streams. But otherwise, we will see everyone in the next video.